Alaikum and welcome to Open Dialogue. I have been discussing social issues in this new series of this part of the show. I hope that it's been bringing more insight and awareness, especially to your households, because these are topics that are very much in my profession, and I do coach one-to-one, but I want to bring it on a wider platform so that everybody can have this sort of coaching. I've invited lots of different guests in order to give their insights and opinions, and it's not necessarily something which is personal, so we're talking in general. Even if I'm coaching clients, all the issues that are raised are very much confidential and private, and there's just case studies that have been brought to my attention, which is actually more than one person in the community and outside the community that are raising these topics. And it's of vital importance that we actually raise these issues in platforms like this so that we can actually help in your household. Today we're going to be discussing the challenges in marriages today. We've always had these kind of issues, but I think that in this day and age, it's slightly changing and slightly more detrimental. And we need to obviously make more awareness and give the highlights as to what are these challenges so that hopefully we can overcome them. Please remember this is a live show and you can call in the numbers at the bottom of your screen with your comments or questions. With me, I have my guest today, Brother Ridha Jafar. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you so much for joining me and being very brave to discuss this topic.
Thank you very much.
And we have also our prominent scholar, Syed. Razavi. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you so much as well for always being here and giving us, and he's got over 20 years experience with regards to relationships and marriages as well as divorce, so there's a lot of insight that can be taken from the show. And if you do want the discussion to go in a particular way, because it can go anywhere today depending on what we decide, you can have your say by calling in. So we'll start with you, Brother Ali. Challenges in marriages. Okay, this is quite general, I understand.
Yeah.
So when you look around the community or when you come across people that sort of speak about their challenges, what are the most the things that come up more and more, especially today compared to maybe what you could remember years ago?
Yeah, I think you're quite right when you say that this is it is a lengthy topic, and it's certainly not something that we're necessarily going to cover in 45 minutes to also talk about, what the challenges are. And much of what I'm going to discuss is going to be based upon, research.
Good.
More than my own opinion. There's a very good book I was reading, actually learning a lot from, called The 7 Principles for Making Marriage Work, a practical guide for by John M. Gottman. And it's a very interesting book that talks all about, and the guy studied a lot of marital relationships.
I'm quite familiar with him, yeah.
A lot of challenges that couples face. And I think one of the challenges that people face is communication, where couples don't really know how to communicate diplomatically. And when they don't do that, their partner may get very irate or just may hear what they essentially want to hear. And I think another challenge, of course, is a lack of preparation for what marriage entails.
100%.
People, certainly young gentlemen such as me, for example, I need to have an appreciation for what it means to get married. I may need to change my life of being a bachelor and do things differently. I may not be able to go out every night, and I may need to adapt my social way of being because there is someone else to consider. So you're saying that marriage
is kind of constricting or restricting, or it's putting you in a box or a label?
No, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that one has to adapt to being in an environment where they have to think about someone else.
Yes, there's consideration, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you're actually going to be doing things in a particular way which you would do as a bachelor all the time, though. No,
not all the time, but I think there is a restriction, there is a constriction. One is somewhat inhibited when they're married. And now look, there are a lot of gentlemen out there who might think, well, I don't want to get married because, I'll have to change my life, and therefore they use this as a reason not to get married. But I think there are restrictions, but those are the restrictions that are part of everyday life. When I get a job and I need to come in at a certain time and leave at a certain time, that is a restriction, but it's not deemed to be seen as a restriction?
I think we have to be careful of the language, because I think, studying linguistics and also being coaching couples myself, a lot of us are, like, for example, you use the word restriction. I think that's quite detrimental for marriages as an outlook, because it's not about restriction. I think it's having a perception of having a different consideration, as you mentioned before, is better, as well as having a different adaptation and to life when you're considering somebody else. Because restrictions kind of like holds people back, or it puts them in a particular way where they feel that all of a sudden, if they're going to enter into marriage, then that's what it entails. But it doesn't necessarily mean that, because when I coach couples, I find that when there's understanding, when there's friendship, when there's respect, then those sort of restrictions are not there, and they can actually have more freedom. And most people in the past used to marry because they wanted to get the freedom out of their family. So there's two ways of looking at that.
I agree. I think it's semantics, but I think, I think restriction, constriction, whatever you want to call it, I think the fact remains that when you get married, life is different.
It's different, yes.
And it's as simple as that.
So, Syed, in your years of dealing with lots of challenges that you, I know, face all the time, do you think that it has changed with regards to the actual issues that you come across? Or do you think in this day and age, especially recently, are there something in particular that may stand out more?
I think compared to the time that our parents got married and lived together, there was more tolerance and less interference in the marital life by others. Now, with the existence of all new gadgets, social media, and as soon as something happens, immediately it's reported to mother or sister or someone, and they advise differently and interfere in the lives of the young newly married couple. That causes a lot of problem. In the past, if they argued and disagreed, they would, or they may not talk to each other, and after a few days they would come back to each other, start sorting out their problem. Or maybe they used to live with extended families who used to monitor the problems between the young couple, and they would give assurance to the young lady that, look, I went through these problems and you don't need to react in this way, and things would change. So these are the differences, unfortunately, leading into silly reasons for divorce. For example, recently I was shocked to hear that a couple had a child, and they started to have argument on naming the child. I will just give a different name. So,
case study.
For example, the father of the child said, "I would like to name the child Ali," and the mother said, "I would like to name Hussein." And the reason this argument was that the father of the groom had chosen Ali, and the father of the bride has chosen Hussein. And they were not coming to agreement, and it went up to the extent of divorce. So when they came to me, I said, well, you could have kept the name Ali Hussein.
Both, yes.
And you keep calling him Ali, and she keeps calling him Hussein. This is not a reason for divorce. Unfortunately, there are very basic and very silly reasons for divorce nowadays, and people would have put up with it and carried on.
Definitely. I find also, personally, studying human behavior and psychology and understanding people in general, even if social media has come in there, whatever it may be, I find that the similarities, especially within our community, is quite similar, because our cultures get involved more than our actual religion. People get involved no matter what. And expectations today is slightly different, to be honest. It's much more to do with regards to the finance, materialism, how to up one another. And I also find with human beings generally, it's, the ego taking over most of the time.
Yeah.
We do have three ego states. We have the child, the adult, and the parent ego state. So what are we using when we're speaking to our spouses? And sometimes when you become a parent, you speak to the spouse as if you're talking to your child. So there is a lot of techniques and strategies that I have learned and used to help and manage couples, but it really does come with being self-aware, having that awareness of as well of your values and your beliefs and what is your foundation and how does your environment and everything else coincides with that. So what do you find? I mean, there should be mercy, there should be tolerance. Do you think that in today's day and age, maybe that's lacking a little bit because maybe also with technology we get things straight away? People are probably more disposable. I know that's not the right way to use it, but there's a lot more availability of mixing because people that are shy and they were introvert, now they can mix on social media and they don't have to speak up, but then they can meet people online. So then that brings another opportunity that wasn't before. Do you think that also can bring struggles in a marriage, or do you have a completely different idea altogether?
Is that for me?
Yes,
oh, right,
please,
right,
Razavi.
okay, yes, right, yeah. Well, I don't think so. I know loads of single people who have access to WhatsApp, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram,
Yeah.
and they remain single. So I don't really think that the opportunity has grown tremendously.
Yes, it's the person.
In order for people to find a spouse. I do agree with you that sometimes ego does get in the way because, if you're a gentleman who incidentally, say, when you talk about Ali Hussein, I have 3 boys, Ali Yasser, Ali Yusuf and Ali Saleh. So you can imagine the number of fights that we had to come to that compromise. But
you would alert the Homeland Security in America.
we do every time we travel, unfortunately.
It happened to us because all my daughters are called Sayyida, and
There you go.
So when they go, they suddenly, why they're all Sayyidas?
So we didn't consider that. But I think going back to this issue of restriction or constriction, or whatever you want to call it, let's just call it a different lifestyle. When you get married, and say, for example, I'm a bachelor and I go out every day, all right? Now, suddenly there is someone else that I have to consider.
Yeah.
And I might find it inferior to me. And I'm not saying this is right, but this is perhaps what people feel, that why do I need to consult my wife about going out on a Wednesday? And that's where the ego kicks in, that, I'm free. I shouldn't have to consult her. I shouldn't have to see, well, look, what are you doing on Wednesday? Is it convenient? Or should I try and say, well, look, why don't you go out and I'll go out and perhaps we spend that day with our friends. And I think when we get married, we must have an appreciation for the fact that we are living with someone else who may want to share their day's experiences, who may have had a bad day, and there's no harm in providing notice, as opposed to sort of, saying, good evening, dear, I'm going out tonight. When you're leaving work, I won't be home for dinner, despite the fact that dinner may already be prepared, and being inconsiderate, it may be very helpful to try and organise one's schedule differently to when one was single, by saying, look, a week in advance, I would like to go out on Wednesday, and therefore I won't need you to prepare dinner, assuming that the wife prepares the dinner. I mean, it's another discussion as to, let's not get into, because that might open up another can of worms as to why she should prepare dinner in the first place and all the rest of it. That's a separate discussion. But that's the point about providing notice, being cognizant of the fact that there is someone else to
consider.
think about.
Of course, there's a responsibility, and I totally agree with that. But what my point was is that there is no wrong and right. It's just that when 2 people come together, they really have to understand themselves really well, and they have to know, if they know themselves really well, that they can actually know the other person as well, because they have to understand what are the needs, what are the wants, what are the requirements. So I feel that when 2 people can come together and have that, then it wouldn't matter whether or not they even said, oh, I'm going out because, or even say it or not, because there's an understanding, there's a friendship, and they both have that independency, they have their own identity, and they can come together. And if there was an equal treatment where if the wife goes or the husband goes, that's not the issue. The issue is when one is more dominant or the other one has more control or there's less and lack of consideration. And I feel that the struggles here is that there isn't that conversation, like you said, communication. But what does communication mean? And how do you communicate? And we all have a different love language as well, which is, at the end of the day, we all want to receive and give in a different way, but we don't even understand this kind of concept.
Yeah, there's a good book about that, The 5 Love Languages.
Yes, there is.
I don't agree with you.
In what sense don't you agree with me?
I don't agree with you. I don't think that there is no I don't think the argument that there's no right or wrong.
Okay.
I don't think is the case.
I mean, between two people, they can make their own.
We're not robots, whereby everyone just. There's not this utopic environment where I can read my wife's mind.
Absolutely not reading them. That's what I mean.
I don't think it's right or wrong. I think it is wrong where a husband chooses to go out without consulting his wife, speaking to his wife and saying, look, I'm going out this evening, if that is possible. Now, I'm not saying that, there aren't these spontaneous occasions where,
of course,
a need may arise, but I think where the opportunity is there, it is good to consult, not say, well, look, we're best mates, we have this understanding, this utopic relationship, which I don't think exists, by the way, and therefore I can just disappear as and when I feel like it, and hopefully my wife will be okay with it. I think that's a gross assumption, and I think that's what leads to marital problems.
I think so. What you're saying is totally correct to one instance, but I'm not saying that there should be this
What's the other instance?
The other instance is when there's two people that have an understanding that, yes, I'm going to consult you, or yes, there will be times. That's what I meant, not this sort of fairy tale image that there shouldn't be consideration. There is responsibility and consideration, and most likely, especially, I feel what's lacking is not that what you sort of described that I described, is actually about having friendship and respect. And I think that also differs from the beginning of a marriage to the end or the middle, and especially when it's over years. And I think those are the struggles that we're not addressing when it comes to relationships. We're not understanding, because we can have better relationships with our friends, even though we have them for years, but we do not have those relationships and that consideration with our actual spouse.
I agree with you.
That's what it is.
We're in agreement on that front.
It's not about agreement. It's about really highlighting the instances that happen. I do have an insight of what happens in people's households, because I am invited to those households. And when we have consideration, that has to be consideration which is fair and which is equal and is both of an understanding, and that has to be highlighted because they both share the same values. And if you both share the same values and principles in whichever way, then those things are something which most of the time that consideration is not actually like as if we're putting it forward. It's more about, it's just a natural given.
Yeah, I agree, but I don't see where. But I still feel that the communication I don't think one can hide behind, oh, I'm best friends with my wife, she will understand, therefore I can do whatever I want.
It's between the two people, really.
Well, it's not, but I think there has to be a prescription for humour. We can't say it's between the two people, because then there is no prescription for the ideal marriage. We just say it was between.
I don't think there is a prescription.
Whatever you think
Actually,
is best.
there isn't. The only prescription I would say is Islamically.
There are right and wrongs.
Yes, Islamically there are right and wrongs.
There
but
you go.
when I feel that culture comes in between and other members come in between as well, that also, and society cliches and statements that say that, oh, the husband should provide, or, the wife should always be at home, or certain things like that, which kind of limits. And nowadays the roles have changed, which actually can.
I think the husband should provide. Why should he not?
I'm just saying, if in
Why is that
certain
a cliche?
cases, I'm just saying a lot of the times it's expected, which actually makes it detrimental in the family household, because I know a lot of women that actually do hold that financial burden on them, okay? So it's not like as if, even if it's the norm, and times have changed. So that's why even the struggles are there, because if the man is only there to provide, then if that's taken away, what else is there? There has to be more. That's my point, from both sides. So that's why the struggles are changing, because women's roles now have changed, where they can provide financially, they can actually look after the kids, they can do everything more than a man. So then if you're saying that if that's only the man's thing, and if that's taken away, then that's a problem.
I did not say that at all.
Or they should. It's not about that. But I'm just saying.
I did not say that. I said the husband should provide. I did not say that a wife should impose upon her husband. I did not say that the husband should solely provide, but I don't think there is anything wrong with the narrative that the husband should provide. What's wrong with that?
Oh, absolutely.
I could be completely wrong.
No, I mean, it is definitely
I don't
written.
See why that's a problem.
It's definitely written, for a man and a wife, what's, his is hers and what's hers is hers.
There you go.
There you go.
Yeah.
That's fine, but I'm just saying the roles have changed.
Rules are there to solve the problem.
Yes.
Otherwise, the best way to live together is mutual agreement.
Yes.
Blanket permissions. understanding each other's position in the society and family. So if the mutual agreement is there, you can solve the problem.
So what other struggles do you find, Syed, when you come across families that come to you or couples that come to you, especially today? Like, what is the main difference? Do you find, because you mentioned before, it's like the petty stuff, which shouldn't ever been mentioned, like you said about the names, for example, or someone else. Now, in the past, that wasn't. What has changed where now this pettiness has come, where that's actually been an issue now, which is causing the struggles in marriages?
I think, these problems may have existed in the past as well, but nobody used to talk about them. It used to remain within the small unit of family and they used to sort out the problem within the family and community, small community and small circle. The problem nowadays is it spreads a lot. It goes out. The dirty laundry goes out more in public rather than staying in the family. Although in some cases where serious abuse is taking place, the solution is not to keep it in a...
But there's certain people that you should raise that with, not everyone.
Then you have to raise it with the experts.
Exactly.
And this is what Islam says. For example, spreading a sin is wrong. For example, if somebody's committed some sin, you start telling everyone, the whole world, that this person has committed sin, that is wrong. Because the spread of sin promotes sin. It reduces the seriousness of the sin. But to deal with the wrongdoing is extremely important. You have to refer to an expert, a counselor, or maybe a police or a court.
Do you think in our communities...
Those experts should know what is... if they don't know, they wouldn't be able to help.
Do you think in our community we have enough of these counselors and coaches? Because I do couples coaching, but most people haven't even heard of it. Because a lot of the times they are going to their family members, and they're not necessarily going to be taking that non-judgmental, non-biased side when they're going to be speaking to either whoever is going to be involved. So when it comes to counseling and coaching and things like that, do you think that our communities need to be more involved, even if they are in the centers? Is that offered, when they come to for any problems or anything like that?
Community should be involved in teaching general rules. The leaders of the community, the centers of the community should be educating and creating awareness of each other's responsibilities and duties. Not by spreading sin in the community or society or corruption. We should just teach them. There is no shyness in teaching of Islam. If you want to teach something which is haram or forbidden, there's nothing wrong. Nowadays, these LGBT and all these subjects are being discussed. There are two different opinions. Some people say don't discuss it at all. If you don't discuss it at all, the others will teach your children.
Yeah.
So we have to find a way how to discuss it, how to disclose it, how to bring it into family, because if you are not going to discuss it, they are going to be told in school in a non-Islamic way. So we have to find an Islamic way how to discuss and tackle these issues. And similarly, in relation to the family, husband and wife problems, if there are any issues, we have to discuss them in a way that it sorts out the problem.
So, Brother Ali, I find that you've got lots and lots of notes there. So what else could you add to the struggles that we have today?
When I realised I was doing a show with you, Fahim, I felt the need to, I felt compelled. I'd watched all the YouTube clips and I felt compelled to prepare. And I'm having to drink water, it's already finished, clearly. So I think there's a very interesting example talking about friendship that John Gottman talks about in his book. And what he says is that, he gives an example of a couple who work really long hours. And so they don't really, we're all familiar with this. You leave the house at 7:30, you get home at 10. There is very little time to interact with your spouse. And then how do you deal with that? And what Gottman says is, he goes, it's quite interesting. that he gives a hypothetical example of where a guy will actually make a conscious effort to text his wife during the day and say, look, how was the doctor's appointment that you went to? How's dinner coming along? That was I'm just saying, or he'll make a conscious effort to say, how are the kids? How was your day?
Yeah.
How was the situation?
Yeah.
And what he said is that's actually a very good way to nurture friendship between the husband and the wife, to make a conscious effort. So when the wife, for example, cooks for the husband, whose name I think in the book is Nathan or whatever, we call him Mahomed, for example, yeah. And when he cooks
These are
for
case
him,
studies
when she cooks for Mahomed, then she'll make sure that when she's making chicken, that she gives him drumsticks, because she knows that he likes drumsticks, and he gets very happy by that. And on the same front, when he cooks, there's good mutuality in this relationship, because he cooks pancakes. The man cooks pancakes on Sunday mornings, and when he does so, he knows that she doesn't like blueberries, so he removes the blueberries. And what Gottman says is, he uses an interesting terminology of positive. Let me just look this up, because I've forgotten what it was now. It's positive sentiment override, is what he calls it. And what he says is, this is very useful, because when you have this friendship of communicating during the day, giving consideration to the drumsticks, to the blueberries, making a conscious effort to take an interest in your spouse and not getting boiled down in the day-to-day, which is very easy to do.
Yeah, of course.
Then when conflict does arise, that positive sentiment override then makes things very different.
Yeah.
So I think my advice, based on not my own experience, of course, is I'm always just talking to my wife. And transit calls are very good, by the way. You get Bluetooth in your car on your way to work. You have the conversation,
okay,
and such like.
We'll have our call in to sort of confirm that.
You make feel free to call in.
Yes, please do.
Yes, feel free to call in. So when you're having those calls, it's about making that conscious effort to communicate, because it's very easy for couples to get into the day-to-day minutiae and forget about one another. And then when you go home, you're too tired, and all the rest of it. So the tip, to answer your question, the tip would be make a conscious effort to communicate with your spouse, especially when you're working long hours during the day, and make an effort to make notes. So if there is a doctor's appointment, ask about that doctor's appointment. And yeah, that's enough. That's what I have to say.
No, I mean, it's what you've said has raised a lot of questions in my head. I've also been studying neuroscience, and unfortunately, our brain only operates 95% of the time from the subconscious, not the conscious. So we need to train in our habits and reprogram ourselves, and that's where self-development comes into it. That's where psychology comes into it. That's when a lot of self-awareness comes into it. People can do what you're saying, but only when they take them steps to actually be of that level of having that understanding about themselves and about human behavior to a certain extent, so that they can actually use that for themselves and the other person. We have to learn these skills and techniques. It is a skill to be a parent, just as it is nowadays to be a spouse.
Yeah, but I don't think you need to be a neuroscientist to sort of.
No, I'm not that, but
if during the day. I think you over.
No, I mean, because you say because you said to be
overcomplicate
conscious,
this.
but I'm saying we use 5% of our brain scientifically that is only conscious, and 95% is subconscious.
It is, but I think what we just need to do during the day is simply make an effort to just train ourselves to communicate. And I don't think there's, and I think you could apply it tomorrow. I mean, someone who's watching, if there's anyone watching who maybe agrees with me, who's in this predicament, who works these very long hours, just make an effort to text your wife during the day, say, Salaam alaikum, dear, how's your day going? I watched Ahlebait TV yesterday, But just make a conscious effort to have that communication. Just start. I think sometimes we don't just start that communication.
Yes,
and the wife should do the same, saying, that meeting, how did that meeting go? And then you'll find that friendship, in my view, would develop very quickly, and I think I'd encourage everyone to do so.
Yes, it's creating good habits, and at the same time, it's you having that urgency and that need to wanting to do that.
Yes.
Because that's really, really important. That we might say that, this is what make marriages happen, but it really doesn't take 50-50% for each one. It's 100% from each person.
Yep.
So
One should strive towards that.
Yes, and that's what we need to do. So each one has that responsibility, and each one is accountable. Because at the end of the day, even we know we're going to be asked, for how we are treating people around us. It's really important, even for our children. They're not our property, neither are our wives or husbands. There is a responsibility much higher level if you are operating from that sort of frequency, especially spiritually and in faith terms. This is something that you're going to be accountable for. So you need to take that other person, not lightly, to have that responsibility and to actually think of that. Syed, Islamically, it's very simple, I feel, to be in marriages and to even have issues and, overcome them. But I find that a lot of it is cultural based, for example, that comes in between our marriages. In certain cultures especially, it's like, we've always done it this way. I have to come into the house, for example, as, a sister-in-law, and, the wife has to be the one cooking and serving me regardless. So there's not even a human aspect there. It's more the cultural aspect that gets involved. And it actually makes and causes a lot of problems. And they make it like as if there should be a rule book on culture more than there is on religion, even though there's a book on religion, but that's disregarded. And that seems to cause a lot of issues, especially when, for example, if people have, problems, I know even having, forget choosing them, but when they've chosen their spouse and that spouse get ill, they have a disability, they have a problem, all of a sudden they want to disregard or fall away from that marriage. And these are things that, we need to sort of think to ourselves, it could happen to us, it could happen to our children. Why is this happening? Why is our society today more about culture and following that as a rule than our religion?
Yeah, that is the problem in our society. People forget Islamic teachings and they impose each other's culture on each other, so that's where the things go wrong. Even if you are brought up in a same city, same family, and get married to your cousin, you're bound to have different differences.
Of course,
because the house you were brought up and your cousin or someone close to you in the city you got married was brought up is different. They had different father and mother, they had different environment, different type of house, and so they're bound to have problems. So when we start living together, we have to give in, and we have to have tolerance.
Of course.
Otherwise, we will not be able to survive. My father used to give example, marriage is just like two wheels of a bike. They have to
work together.
Work together. And reminds me, somebody went to Imam Khomeini rahmatullah alayh and asked him to do their marriage. And marriage was done, and after the marriage was done, he asked Imam Khomeini to give advice. He said, be tolerant. So he said, give some other advice. So he said, be tolerant. Then he said something else, and the third time he also said the same thing, be tolerant.
I think,
and don't impose yourself on each other. Be understanding. Don't. And the criteria should be Islamic values, not cultural values.
Exactly. And when you highlight things like language and like tolerance, with that comes mercy, with that comes empathy, with that comes understanding and patience, and that's between the spouses as well as with the extended family. And if that was actually taken into consideration first, then maybe we won't have as many challenges to overcome as well. And I think we're forgetting the basics and the foundations, and that's where most of the struggles are happening. So we blame social media, we blame, and like Brother Ali mentioned before, I know loads of single people that are having this in sort of technology, but they're not using it, they don't need to, which I feel, again, it comes down to your own values and principles. And I think we need to go to the core of our Islamic religion, because I think in that sense it is not cultural based, and it's very simple even to get married without any of the pressures, the expectations, and even while you're in marriage, the fairness between the husband and wife. Imam Zain al-Abidin has these rights, the books and treaties, which give each person, each individual their rights, and we need to be educated about that and put that forward first. So Brother Ali, what more do you have to add before we get to the end of this? We've got a few more minutes. Don't worry.
Time flies when you're having fun. I think one of the things that I think works really well is keeping relationships independent and separate.
Explain.
So, yeah, I thought that would get you excited. So what I mean by that is, you know, there's no rule that says that if you're going to visit your in-laws, so let's take my example. If I'm going to visit my in-laws, there's no rule that says I have to go with my wife.
Yeah.
Right? I can have a direct relationship with my in-laws outside of the presence of my wife. Right? Now, culturally, it's quite interesting because we seem to think, well, on Sundays or so, whenever, we'll all go together to the in-laws, right?
Yeah.
And then there's almost this abstract thing that, well, if the wife's not around, one can't go to the in-laws. Or this is certainly what happens
But
many a
does
times.
one want to go to the in-laws without the wife?
Well, I
that's
think
the difference.
that's no, but I think that's the whole point. Is if you work on developing that direct relation. I invite people to try this. You know, pop down to your in-laws, give them a call, and say, "I want to come and have a cup of tea." Yeah. And they're going to probably think you're coming to, with a list of complaints or something, right?
Yes.
But just I want to come to, and actually sit there and see what happens, and just enjoy that interaction with your in-laws. Look, we use the word father-in-law, mother, for a reason. We don't use uncle and aunt. There is a reason why these terms are used. And so I would invite people to really think about having that direct relationship with the in-laws, because then, let's face it, many a time the in-laws are a major can often be a bit of an impediment when it comes to relationships. I mean, it does come up.
Yes,
let's be frank about this. But when one has that direct relationship, I think
100%.
it makes things. I'm glad you agree, Fahim. It makes things much, much easier, and I think it also strengthens the relationship between the husband and the wife.
Definitely.
So that's what I have to say on that front. Now, there was another example. And the final thing I'll say is I think it's all about communication. So I think again, in this excellent book, The 7 Principles for Making... I'm not on commission, by the way. It's a very good book. You can get it on Amazon. John M. Gottman, he actually says, it's like if a wife wants a husband to tidy up the table, there's many different ways she can say this. She can say, oh, for heaven's sake, you haven't tidied up the table.
Yes.
What's wrong with you? Why do I always have to tidy up the table? Can you not see? Or... Now, the husband will reply to that saying, oh, well, I'm really tired of having a long day. You never fill petrol. I had to fill petrol this morning.
Yeah.
And it escalates. Rather, in this sort of situation, obviously there's a communication issue when it comes to the wife. But in this sort of situation, if the husband just says, you're right, I will tidy the table. I'll help you tidy the table.
Or acknowledge.
Let's do it together. Suddenly, you find you've de-escalated the situation. And the wife may think, you know what? Perhaps I shouldn't have been that harsh. But often things escalate because people have the ego kicks in.
Yeah.
I need to reply. And that doesn't help. So I think individuals need to be aware of how to communicate and give their spouses the benefit of the doubt. When I've heard something, I've heard, oh, she's being very annoying, nagging me to clear the table. That's what the husband is hearing. But the reply should be, you know what? You're right. And it just pacifies the situation.
Yeah, no, 100%. I think communication skills, we talk about it, but we're not giving the actual ways in which how we need to communicate. The tone, the attitude, the language, the way in which we use language is completely necessary when you're trying to get across. We'll make the complete effort when we're in a business deal because you don't want to put the other person in the wrong assumption.
Absolutely.
But when it comes to our household, we're not using the right skills in communication and talking, and that's why there becomes criticism instead of, you just trying to give an understanding or an opinion, and then when there's criticism, then there's defense, and then there's attack, and there's, all sorts of things. So definitely, learning and studying and using more clean language, I would say, and learning more about linguistics and how you would also be spoken to and like to be spoken to. But then again, in a family, when you're living day in, day out with that person, sometimes as human behavior, we are, adaptable creatures, and we sometimes fall into where we are too comfortable without having that consideration, and that's why with the friendships that we have outside, we have better relationships and communication than we do with our own households.
I think it's about thinking and being mindful of, before I open my mouth, do I really need to say what I'm about to say? And I think if one sort of just you've got to train as you quite rightly pointed out earlier, one has to train themselves to keep their mouth shut when required. And I think that's very important. I remember a friend of mine who said, what's your guidance? And how can you help me with marriage? And I said, well, the first thing is you need to learn how to keep your mouth shut. And I think that's fundamental. On both sides, that's important, because it's far too tempting to open the mouth and say something which may be derogatory, hurtful, or harsh, as opposed to just keeping one's mouth shut when required and thinking, more importantly, if you are going to speak...
Yeah, I think that's what I was going to say.
Yeah, I know, I almost thought that a canter was on its way. If you are going to speak, then think before you speak. And if you're not sure, then stay silent.
Yeah, the pause is important.
I think that's the point.
Yeah, the pause is extremely important, to breathe and to pause and then sort of let it out, because it's not about not having the emotion, it's not about not having those feelings, but how you're going to react and respond, and that's with everything.
Absolutely.
And we are role models in our house, to be honest, for our children, so that if communication's not good, relationships are not good, there's a filter effect which is much more detrimental, and this is why I'm raising these issues, because a lot of couples come to me with their problems, and the first thing I'm really concerned about is your child. And what does it mean for them? And I help families to get together, and even if they decide not to get together, but to get together in a sense that if you're going to separate, let's do this in the best way possible, because unfortunately these things still do happen, regardless of the months of counseling or whatever. One person just gives up, or the other person just does not feel anything, and it does happen. So that's why I want to raise these issues about the struggles that actually, even I remember listening to a talk, another Syed saying that Islamically, marriage is translated as a shared struggle. This is what we have to live through. We don't have this Hollywood or fairy tale image that we have to always portray and expect, and even especially with the youngsters thinking that, this is how it's going to be. The honeymoon period only lasts for like 6 months. Nowadays, it's like probably 2 months, if not less. And, because times are moving fast and we don't have that ability to even prolong those times. So it's not a bad thing, but, that's why I'm saying human behavior, human understanding and psychology of people does come into play with it, because if you understand something, you'd be more likely to accept, tolerate, have the empathy, use those are powerful words that we need to use in our household so that we can create better relationships. And I think in Islam, especially in our teachings, the household is our foundation. It is a unit that needs to be upheld on the highest level, but now it's breaking down, and that's why society is breaking down. So there's a much bigger, issue that comes from the household, and that's why it's important for me to raise these topics so that people can take it inside and, hopefully, change themselves, make certain adjustments, and, take certain steps forward. If they cannot do it themselves, then seek outside help, and there are many available out there. So before we end the show, I'd like to come to you, Syed Razavi, with some lasting comments before we finish, because it's really important and we want to make a difference, and I want to raise these sort of things so that people can take away at least one thing when they listen and go away. It's not for entertainment, it is educational, and it is really, even though you were quite entertaining today, but I'm just saying it was really nice to have, a variety of opinions, and it's nice to have someone counter me, because I'm not always right. I do come from a place where, I'm just here giving my opinion, and there are other opinions that I want to share. I've had shows on my own, but I prefer to have other people's opinions, because there is a different perspective from wherever we're standing.
Well, I would say that don't jump to conclusions, give benefit of doubt to each other, and as brother was mentioning, don't rush to speak. Sometimes, especially if you are dealing with your wife or ladies in the family, ladies like to just talk and express what they have felt. They are not looking for solutions from you. They're not looking, and men think that if your wife is saying something, she wants the solution. She's not looking for solutions. She just wants to say what happened today.
That's true. Yeah.
So let her talk, and if necessary, give a reply later on.
Yeah, the men's brain and the women's brain is wired
Don't go for solutions
differently.
immediately.
Yeah, absolutely.
That may lead to a divorce solution.
Yeah, no, we have to be careful, absolutely. I mean, our brains are wired differently, and, women can be a bit more emotional and men are more logical, and we need to take a bit of each other and work with that. And at the same time, we can actually work with each other as a team and complement each other. So what would you like to say to finalize the topic?
Well, I think it's just about really being mindful and thinking before one speaks, and being empathetic. When the wife says she's had a tough day, you don't sort of say, man up or grow up and get on with it sort of thing. You say, well, why have you had a tough day? I'm sure that was an extremely tough experience. And I'm not saying be pretentious or be fake. I'm not saying that at all, but I'm saying it's about being sympathetic. Oh, your children were really naughty today. You know, my children, yeah, the children were really naughty today. Really gave me a hard. That must have been really difficult for you, as opposed to just going, yes, well, let's move on. I don't think that helps. So I think one just has to be. We just got to, train ourselves when it comes to communicating with our spouses, because they are human beings. We're not robots, and I think that also gives the. So we mustn't assume. Sometimes, we assume that my wife may assume. I think that my wife may assume that I sympathise with her. So I might think yes. But by me nodding and saying yes, that's me being sympathetic, and I assume that she gets that. But by actually saying, well, it must have been a difficult day. Oh yes, the children. It must be hard to deal with the children. Oh yes, perhaps your boss was disrespectful towards you. Just gives a very, gives a more amenable approach to conversation.
No, thank you so much for that, and it was really, really useful to have both of you on the show give your opinions, and I highly appreciate that. And I don't take it lightly. Everyone's opinion is really important, and I just find that in today's day and age, we need to realize that. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does only put us in situations that we can actually overcome. So yes, marriage is quite, a challenge, but it's not to say that we cannot overcome them. But just remember that the importance that it entails, and you've got to look at the bigger picture and outside yourself. And when you put somebody else first and that consideration first, it does come back to you in so many different ways. So don't take it lightly that when you're in a marriage, if there's a problem, to just, go thinking that the grass is greener, or there's the exit door and it's easy for me to try again, because believe me, you'll have the same issue or a different issue or whichever, but there will be an issue. So we need to work on what we have and build and, create ourselves in a particular way as well, by having self-development and improving ourselves first, and that's when we can sort of transfer that and project that to the other side. I hope that this was quite, insightful for everybody. We didn't get any calls, which is a shame. So inshallah, we will be back next week, and I hope that you will be participating. We'll have a new topic and new guests, and until then, we will see you soon. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.